In The Sopranos, moral order doesn't collapse in a single act of violence. It dissolves slowly through compromise. The series, more than any other crime drama, treats corruption not as an external disease, but as an internal habit spreading quietly through every institution and individual. Nowhere is this clearer than in the evolving relationship between Tony Soprano and FBI agent Dwight Harris. Also guys, only 1% of the people who view my videos are subscribed. If you enjoy what you see and want to see more videos, please subscribe to the channel. Across 6 seasons, their dynamic transforms from hostility to cooperation, from contempt to a strange, mutual respect. This shift is subtle, even easy to miss, yet it carries enormous thematic weight. It shows how self-interest erodes principle, how institutions mirror the people they chase, and how the distinction between criminal and authority eventually collapses. By the end, Tony and Harris no longer represent opposite sides of justice. They are reflections of the same system, bound by pragmatism, power, and fatigue. When the series begins, the FBI is omnipresent in Tony's life. Agents tail his car, tap his phones, and stage frequent raids on Satrials in his home. Harris, along with his partner Grosso, represents the impersonal face of the federal machine, bureaucratic, efficient, and humorless. To Tony, the FBI is not just a threat, but a constant reminder that control is temporary. In these early seasons, Harris functions symbolically as Tony's external conscience, a moral force pressing against him from the outside. Every time Tony enjoys success or stability, a raid or wiretap reminds him of the walls closing in. Yet even in these early encounters, there's a tone that's distinct from pure hostility. Tony mocks the agents, chats with them, and treats the whole spectacle almost like a game. This playful attitude signals an early crack in the wall separating criminal and cop. Tony doesn't see the FBI as sacred authority. He sees them as part of the same chessboard. Harris, for his part, initially maintains the professionalism of a man who has seen hundreds like Tony, but The Sopranos establishes him differently from the usual FBI caricature. He's neither moralistic nor naive. He studies Tony's world, observes its rhythms, and even shows flashes of curiosity about its internal logic. This sets the stage for what's to come, a gradual erosion of professional distance. A turning point comes with the show's subtle but crucial reference to 9/11. After the attacks, Harris and Grosso are reassigned to counter-terrorism. The change reflects a real shift in FBI priorities, but also serves a narrative purpose. It removes Harris from the traditional cop versus mobster script and gives him a new, more flexible identity. When Harris re-enters the story later, he's no longer investigating Tony. At least not directly. Instead, he seeks information about Arab nationals connected to Satrials and the Bing. The irony is immediate. The agent, once chasing Tony, now needs him. This power inversion fascinates Tony. He senses the imbalance and exploits it. For the first time, he can offer something the Bureau wants. Analytically, this is where the relationship moves from opposition to negotiation. The post-9/11 context gives both men plausible deniability for their cooperation. Harris can justify it as intelligence gathering, and Tony can rationalize it as patriotism. Yet underneath that veneer of practicality lies moral contamination. Tony's motivations are purely self-interested, providing small pieces of information to create goodwill and reduce scrutiny. Harris's motivations, meanwhile, reflect bureaucratic exhaustion and the seduction of familiarity. He knows Tony is a criminal, but he also knows Tony's tips are sometimes useful, and his company oddly human. In essence, terrorism displaces organized crime as the Bureau's top concern, and that displacement leaves moral space for corruption to grow. Harris's cooperation with Tony is not a betrayal of the FBI's goals, but an adaptation to new priorities. The show uses this shift to reveal how institutional ethics bend to circumstance. In a crisis, the law becomes flexible. So does the conscience. The most fascinating aspect of the Tony-Harris relationship is not their exchanges themselves, but the psychology underlying them. Over the years, both men develop a mutual recognition, not friendship, but something close to professional empathy. They understand the pressures that define each other's worlds. Harris sees Tony as intelligent, organized, and in some ways more competent than many of his own colleagues. Tony, meanwhile, sees in Harris a mirror of himself, a man working within a rigid system but willing to bend rules when necessary. This psychological proximity blurs the traditional moral divide. In the classical gangster narrative, law and crime are opposing moral poles. The Sopranos dismantles that entirely. Harris's growing familiarity with Tony demonstrates how morality is not a fixed boundary, but a sliding scale, one that shifts when comfort, respect, or power are at stake. The show subtly depicts this erosion through tone and body language. Harris begins to address Tony less like a target and more like an acquaintance. He asks about his health, comments on mutual contacts, and eventually behaves as though their relationship exists outside of the law. Tony, always a master manipulator, leans into this, appealing to Harris's ego, complimenting his professionalism, and turning their conversations into exchanges between equals. This is not friendship. It's mutual utility disguised as civility. Yet the civility itself carries moral danger. Once the hunter sees the hunted as human, he's already compromised. The moment Harris begins to sympathize with Tony, the structure of justice weakens, not because he betrays his oath, but because he forgets what that oath means. Tony's decision to cooperate with Harris, selectively and strategically, is one of his most cunning maneuvers in the series. He understands that total resistance to the FBI invites more aggression, while limited cooperation creates leverage. By providing harmless intelligence about suspicious Arabs or possible terrorist funding, Tony gains something invaluable: protection through ambiguity. From an analytical perspective, this is Tony weaponizing morality itself. He turns the appearance of civic responsibility into a shield. Each time he meets with Harris, he reframes himself as a citizen with useful information rather than a criminal under siege. The FBI, distracted by broader national concerns, allows this illusion to persist. Tony's behavior here also reveals his hypocrisy. Throughout the series, he condemns informants as traitors, executing or ostracizing anyone caught speaking to the government. Yet when he himself does it, he rationalizes it as business. This double standard lies at the heart of Tony's psychology. He believes morality applies only when convenient. The rules are binding only on others. In this sense, Tony's cooperation with Harris is not just tactical, but symbolic. It's the logical endpoint of his worldview, a world where loyalty is transactional, where even enemies can become allies if the price is right. By turning partial informant, Tony shows that the code he claims to live by is hollow, a set of phrases used to maintain dominance, not ethics. If Tony's arc is one of calculated manipulation, Harris's is one of gradual contamination. Over the seasons, the agent's professional boundaries erode until he becomes a participant in the very world he's meant to police. The process is slow and believable, which makes it all the more unsettling. The first stage is simple pragmatism. Harris takes Tony's calls, accepts his tips, and occasionally offers polite small talk in return. Then comes complicity. He begins sharing information about other investigations, hinting at what the Bureau knows, and subtly advising Tony on how to avoid certain pitfalls. Each step can be rationalized, but each also moves him further away from his duty. The culmination arrives near the end of the series when Harris warns Tony about Phil Leotardo's movements during the mob war. This moment completes Harris's moral descent. He's no longer observing the criminal ecosystem, he's influencing it. When Phil is killed, Harris's reaction, cheering, almost giddy, is a striking inversion of the lawman archetype. He's emotionally invested in one side's victory. Analytically, this scene encapsulates the Sopranos' broader commentary on power. The thrill of control corrupts everyone. Harris begins as an agent of order, but ends as a voyeur of chaos, deriving satisfaction from outcomes he should have prevented. His excitement at Phil's death is not professional closure. It's personal catharsis. Like Tony, he's been drawn into the intoxicating cycle of violence and retribution. Through Harris, the show argues that proximity to corruption is itself corrupting. To watch long enough without intervening is to become complicit. The line between participant and observer, between justice and vengeance, dissolves entirely. By the final season, Tony and Harris are bound not by friendship, but by shared cynicism. They both operate within hierarchical systems that claim to uphold order, but function through coercion and fear. The mob demands silence and loyalty. The Bureau demands secrecy and results. Both reward deception and punish transparency. This structural mirroring is the heart of the analysis. The Sopranos uses the Tony-Harris relationship to argue that crime and law enforcement are not opposites, but complementary systems, two faces of power that maintain each other's existence. Tony depends on the FBI to legitimize his sense of rebellion. The FBI depends on people like Tony to justify its funding and authority. In this way, their cooperation becomes almost inevitable. They are part of the same ecosystem. When Tony provides information on potential terrorists, he's participating in the same machinery that surveils him. When Harris bends the rules to help Tony, he validates the very corruption he was trained to fight. Each man's actions reinforce the other's world. The result is moral equivalence, the idea that, at a certain level, the criminal and the cop are governed by identical instincts, control, survival, and self-interest. This equivalence doesn't excuse Tony's violence or Harris's compromise. It exposes how both systems, when stripped of rhetoric, operate through the same psychological mechanics. The show's genius lies in revealing this without didacticism, through quiet exchanges, not speeches. The Tony-Harris relationship also serves as a microcosm of the show's larger critique of moral codes. The Mob's code of silence is presented as sacred, yet routinely violated. The FBI's code of ethics is similarly flexible, bent by ambition and exhaustion. Tony's willingness to talk to Harris is a betrayal of the very code he enforces through murder. Yet he never sees it that way, because he's convinced himself that rules exist only to preserve his power. This selective morality is the defining feature of Tony's leadership, and the reason his organization decays from within. Harris, in turn, mirrors that same selective morality from the institutional side. When he was chasing Tony, he saw cooperation with criminals as necessary corruption. When he begins benefiting from Tony's information, he reframes it as pragmatic collaboration. Both men hide behind the same logic, that compromise is justified when the outcome seems beneficial. This symmetry strips the moral high ground from both sides. In The Sopranos, ethics are not absolute. They are rationalizations designed to mask self-interest. Tony kills informants to protect his image, not his principles. Harris bends the law to maintain relevance, not justice. Their cooperation becomes a perfect synthesis of hypocrisy, a moment where morality collapses into mere transaction. As Tony's world unravels near the series' end, with indictments looming and allies disappearing, Harris becomes one of the few external figures he can still communicate with. Their exchanges take on the tone of two professionals sharing intelligence rather than enemies maneuvering. There's almost a sense of comfort in their interactions, as if each finds in the other a kind of stability that no longer exists elsewhere. This dependence is tragic in its own way. Tony, who has spent his life demanding loyalty through fear, ends up seeking connection through convenience. Harris, who once represented the rule of law, ends up acting like an accomplice. Both have been worn down by years of moral attrition. Analytically, this closing phase of their relationship represents the exhaustion of systems. The mob and the FBI are both institutions past their prime, weighed down by routine and hypocrisy. Tony and Harris are veterans of different wars who have learned the same lesson, that ideals fade, but survival remains. Their cooperation is not born of trust, but of fatigue. Two men too tired to pretend that principles still matter. The ultimate irony is that Tony becomes, in spirit, the very thing he despises. His selective cooperation with Harris makes him an informant in all but name. The difference lies only in perception. He calls it strategy, not betrayal. Yet by the standards he enforces on others, it's treason. This hypocrisy completes his moral disintegration. The man who once killed a lifelong friend for wearing a wire now sells information when it benefits him. He tells himself it's different, that his tips are patriotic, but the reality is identical. He's talking to the feds. The show doesn't punish him directly for this. Instead, it lets the irony linger. Tony lives long enough to become what he hates. For Harris, the irony is parallel. He spends his career chasing mobsters only to end up rooting for one. His final outburst of joy at Phil Leotardo's death, "We're gonna win this thing," is the clearest sign that he's no longer outside the game. He's emotionally invested in its outcomes, addicted to its logic of winners and losers. Like Tony, he mistakes vengeance for justice and satisfaction for meaning. By the series' end, the Tony-Harris dynamic stands as one of The Sopranos' quietest, but most revealing commentaries on moral decay. It shows how power erases distinctions, how the pursuit of control, whether through crime or law, leads to the same ethical destination. Their evolving relationship traces the full arc of corruption: distance, contact, negotiation, complicity, and finally dependence. Each stage mirrors the other's descent. Tony learns to use the state for personal protection. Harris learns to use a criminal for professional fulfillment. Both compromise their codes, both rationalize their actions, and both end up serving the same corrupt equilibrium. The genius of The Sopranos is that it never dramatizes this transformation overtly. It unfolds in glances, favors, and small exchanges, the quiet erosion of two men who began as enemies and ended as reflections. In that reflection lies the series' ultimate truth, that the difference between the law and the outlaw is not moral, but procedural. The badge and the gun, the oath and the code, all are tools of survival within systems that reward manipulation over virtue. Tony Soprano and Agent Harris are not opposites. They are parallel lines that eventually bend toward each other under the weight of corruption. Their alliance, understated but profound, is the Sopranos in miniature, a world where good and evil are not sides in a struggle, but strategies in the same endless game.